Hi! Back again. Oh, it would not be me if I didn't have a bloody hair in my eye right when I started filming. I'll better. So hi guys, my name's Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back for episode 9? 9? It's episode 9 of Killer Weekend, where each week I'll discuss a true crime case and you guys can feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments box below. Please make sure to subscribe to my videos and hit that notification bell just so you don't miss anything. I will be doing a weekly episode. I have had a little bit of issues with audio and things like that, so God, let's hope so that this fixes it. I've tested this mic a few times. It seems like a good one. All the other YouTubers use it. So if it's echoey and not that great right now, I'm sorry guys, but I'm just living, just let me live my life, okay? By the way, has anyone else been watching Vikings? Because me and my boyfriend started watching it, and it's not really my thing. Like, it's kind of like that with Game of Thrones now, because there's a lot of rape in it. Just not about the rape. I just feel like it's a bit, and I know it's how they lived their lives back in the day, but do we really need to see it? Do we? I don't really want to see it. So we started watching it. Obviously there was a few bad scenes at the beginning, but we got through it and I actually quite like it. I hate to admit it because he's been trying to get me to watch it for ages, and then there was a girl on my Instagram that I went to school with. She said that she swears by it. She absolutely loves it, her and her husband. I've been watching like since season 1, so I was like, do you know what, I'll give it a go. I'll be a nice person for once, and I'll give someone the benefit of the doubt. And I actually started watching it and I love it. Like, it's so good. Like, it's getting to the point though that I want to like start putting braids in my hair and shit, and I know that's not okay. It's not appropriate like to wear braids as a grown-ass woman, you know. So if any of you guys are thinking about watching it and you're like, oh, it's a bit of a boys thing, no, give it a go. Give it a go. It's one of those ones, you'll start watching it, you get really invested in the characters, and there's a lot of like badass women in it, which I don't know if they existed back in the day, but I quite like the fact that they've put them in now. But yeah, apart from that, like, it's not really much else to do. I feel like it's got everyone like right zoned into the internet now, because obviously the UK, it looks like we're not going to get out until the summer. That's so much fun. But what are you going to do? Anyway, enough rambling from me, because I've just chatted your ear off probably. Probably. It's like so late at night and I'm filming, it never ends well. So when we were, oh my God, this hair again. It's got a vendetta. So when we were talking about last week's case, which was the chat room killer, it got me thinking about kind of like internet dating, and it really reminded me of this urban legend that I'd heard. So years and years and years ago, when Tinder was like a baby, when no one really knew what Tinder was and it was just starting out, I had heard from a friend of a friend that there was this rumour going about a woman who was attacked or something like that by her Tinder date. And we all kind of assumed that it was one of those ones like chainmail, like pass it on. It didn't happen. It's just someone, it's like an urban legend, a friend of a friend of a friend, and it's happened in every town and all that stuff. So it was around about the time that Dexter was kind of coming out, and I think that's what sparked the inspiration for it. So we all assumed it was kind of maybe true, maybe not true, you didn't quite know. And then years later, like only 2 years ago, it came out again, and it was a girl who was on Facebook Live and was claiming that it happened to her pal, but it never happened to her pal, because I heard it about 10 years ago, babes. So you is a liar. But anyway, that's beside the point. So it's about this young woman, and she goes out on a Tinder date with a guy. They've been chatting for a few weeks and everything's kind of going well. He offers to take her out for dinner. What girl's going to turn down a free meal? Not me. So then they go out and everything's brilliant. She's having drinks, conversations flowing, and then halfway through the meal she starts to feel a little bit sick and kind of has a sore tummy. So she goes to the toilet and she comes back and she's really not feeling well, so she asks the guy if he's okay to drop her home. So the guy drops her off, and then when she pulls up outside the house, she says she feels kind of bad about ending the day early after he spent all this money on a lovely meal, and does he want to come in for a nightcap. So the guy comes in for a nightcap and they have a couple of drinks, and then all of a sudden she starts to feel even worse. She's feeling really sick at this point. So she's nice and polite, but she says her goodbyes, and then the guy goes home. When the guy goes home, she locks the door and goes up to her bed. And then when she's in her bed, she falls asleep right away. But then she starts to hear noises a few hours later, and she's kind of awoken by it. So when she wakes up, she hears this rumbling downstairs as if somebody's like moving furniture about. So understandably, she freaks out and then she calls the police. The police tell her to lock herself in a toilet and ask her what noises she's hearing and is she sure that it's someone in the house. She says absolutely, it sounds like someone's moving furniture about, like heavy furniture, and it's dragging across the floor. They tell her to remain calm, everything's fine. She can just stay in the toilet until they get there and they're on their way. So dispatch sends someone over to the house and they chat to her whilst she's waiting on them coming. Said the noises are getting louder, and then just as she says this, the police are at the door. She can hear them banging the door. But the dispatcher on the phone then tells her that the door is locked from the inside. And she's like, oh God, yeah, I must have locked it before I went to bed. So the dispatcher says, do you give the police permission to batter your door down? Which already I'm calling bullshit, because the only reason being, right, is the fact that what policeman would bring one of those like battering rams to like break a door down? I know obviously in certain places the doors are a wee bit more flimsy, but here in Scotland you wouldn't get away with that. You can't kick a door down, like they're massive wooden doors. You wouldn't be able to do that. So that's already a wee bit fishy. But they break the door down and they get in the house, and all she can hear from the bathroom upstairs is them apprehending someone and a guy kind of screaming out and yelling. Then the police say to her that it's safe for her to come downstairs, that they've got whoever it is in the back of the police car. So she comes downstairs and the policeman says when she gets to the bottom of the stairs, don't go in the living room, don't look in the living room, just go straight to the squad car. But obviously she's gonna look in the living room. She looks in and all she can see is that our furniture has been moved from the middle of the room right to the outsides of the room. So there's just a massive space in the middle of the floor, and it's been covered wall to wall with that like plastic sheeting that Dexter uses. And then right in the middle, there's like a hacksaw and like a knife or some sort of weapon anyway. It changes depending on your source. So she then obviously realises that this guy was in her house. Who was it? They get to the police station, and as she's sitting getting interviewed by the police, there's like a proper like Sydney and Bobby. No. Sydney and Billy. It's Billy, I forgot his name. Sydney and Billy from Scream moment where he like, whoever it is, walks past her. And when she's getting interviewed, the guy walks past her and he turns round and grins at her, and it's the guy she was on the Tinder date with earlier that night. So obviously she's like, what's this all about? And the policeman says that basically what's happened was he's been drugging women and waiting until they get back to the house, or if he's invited back to the house, he then steals a house key from them, locks the door when he leaves, so that when the woman's going to her bed, she just checks the door and she thinks she's locked it herself. And then he comes back later that night when the drugs that he's given her earlier have knocked her out. And then he Dexters the whole place up, and then he kills her and he's killed him. So she's absolutely terrified. And the policeman then goes on to explain the dangers of online dating. I think it's more kind of a cautionary tale. Most of them are like that. Like I remember when obviously the Babysitter Urban Legend episode 1 that we did, and that was very much to prevent young girls from babysitting alone if they were too young, or to lock the doors when they were babysitting other people's children. And then there's loads like check the back seat of the car because there might be somebody hiding. There's loads of them. So I kind of think it was one of those ones, because it's definitely been recycled a few times, and it's never the actual source that says it. It's like a friend of the source that comes forward with info. So it's definitely not true. But it did get me thinking. So I was wondering, I wonder if anyone has ever been murdered on a Tinder date. I wonder if there has ever been a Tinder killer. And I was looking up online, and there apparently has been a few Tinder murders. And I'm not judging anyone who uses Tinder, because I met my fiance on Tinder, so no judgment here. But I just think sometimes you just need to watch who you're talking to. And then not only that, you don't really know who you're talking to half the time. You know, he could have like 5 pictures of this random dude that he stole off Instagram, and you could be speaking to this fat 45-year-old who's sitting in his mum's basement. I just think you never really know, and you never really know how safe to be. And even when someone is who they say they are, they might not even be the right kind of person either. I will start off this week's case with a small disclaimer as well, guys. It does involve details of violent crime and sexual crime, and also possible sexual abuse. So if that's a trigger for you, please feel free, guys, just turn away now. Okay, so this week's case is a bit of an odd one. It starts off with a tale, and the tale is told by a young journalist who goes on a date with a man from Tinder, and it's not a far cry from the urban legend that we just heard there. It's very similar, and unfortunately this journalist had no idea the monster that she was on a date with had a dead body back at his hotel room whilst he was out wining and dining her. This week's case, guys, is the murder of Grace Millane and Jesse Kempson, the Tinder Killer. On the 2nd of December in 2018, Auckland, New Zealand, a young journalist, like we said, was going out on a date with a young man. She'd been speaking to the guy for a few days and she was quite excited about the date. From his pictures on Tinder, he did look kind of handsome-ish, not my bag, but he did look okay, and she was quite buzzing about the date as she hadn't met him yet. He seemed to be quite successful. He claimed that he was a professional athlete, either for New Zealand or Australia. I'm not sure, it doesn't really elaborate on exactly who he played for, but he claimed that he played softball and cricket and things like that. When the woman met the young man, at first she did think he was a little bit nervous. He was downing his drinks quite quickly and it kind of put her off a wee bit. He seemed a bit like a beer guzzler and she wasn't really into that, especially being an athlete. That would have maybe raised a red flag for her, because then why would he be guzzling beers if he was a professional athlete? So the journalist and he start talking, and at first everything's going well, conversation's going good, everything seems completely fine, until the man starts making elaborations to dead women being found in the rural Waitakere area, and the fact that if you bury someone a certain level underground, they can't be found by sniffer dogs, which by the way is not true, so just don't do that. The reporter is trying to kind of make best out of a bad situation, and she tries to kind of join in and says that, oh, that's funny, she's sat in a few murder trials where men have been convicted of murdering women and things like that, and how scary it is. But the guy then jumps on it with a kind of weird statement that it's a shame how a man can make one wrong move and the rest of his life is ruined, which is like, yeah mate, that's called first degree murder. No, don't get it? Okay. At this point, she's a little bit freaked out, understandably, but she continues to be nice to the man because she's a nice person, a saint apparently, because I would have been out the door. And he then gets even creepier. He starts talking about the fact that he's got really close friends in the police, but he doesn't actually work in the police. The reason being is that he met them in a bar one night and then was such a great conversationalist, clearly, that they invited him back to a barbecue where he then befriended all of their other police friends. It just seemed like it was a wee bit bullshitty. She could smell something, it wasn't good, and she then thought, right, I think I'm going to wind this date down because the conversation is just getting creepier and creepier. He then goes on to say about how he heard about a case about a man who strangled his wife whilst they were having sex, and that it was such a shame because this guy lost the love of his life, even though she lost her life. He lost the love of his life and then was convicted on manslaughter for it. It just seemed like it was really pinpointedly like making statements about this, and as if that wasn't damning enough, he then started saying, as if it was like a kind of inside joke, like sniggering to himself, how he had been out earlier that day looking for a duffel bag with wheels, but he couldn't find anything big enough to fit all of his sports equipment. And she said it just seemed like there was something she wasn't quite getting there about this, as if there was some sort of inside joke. When the guy starts talking about poisonous snakes and the effects of their venom, she decides it's time to call it a night. She's over it, no wonder, she lasted longer than most would. He then leaves out of one door and she actually lies to him about where she's parked her car because she feels that uneasy about being near him in the empty car park. So that just goes to show how uneasy he actually made her feel, the fact that she hid inside the other entrance and kidded on until she saw his car leave the car park. As the young journalist got to her car, she had no clue that she had dodged a huge bullet. She had no idea that back in the hotel room of the young man she was just on a date with was a dead 21-year-old backpacker named Grace Millane. Grace Millane was born on the 2nd of December in 1994. She was the only girl in her family. She had 2 brothers as well, and she was born in Essex in England. Her mum and dad had one of those kind of nice open households where their kids could feel free to talk about anything. She was really creative. She was an amazing sketch artist and a brilliant painter, and you can see some of her work online still to this day. But she was really gifted, and it's funny enough, she didn't really do much with her artistry after that. It was just kind of a really nice hobby for her. She actually went on to uni to study marketing and advertising, and once she graduated uni, she decided that she wanted a little bit of fun. She wanted to take a year out before getting into the grind and getting a job, which I think definitely is a good idea. I never did that, and I wish I'd done that. And in this year, she just had loads of fun. I've obviously had a wee look through her Facebook and things like that. She has an in-memory page, and it just looks like she had the best time. She was going to festivals, she was just having a really good time, just a normal kind of British girl enjoying her summer. When Grace was kind of choosing where she wanted to go and things like that, she decided that she didn't want to do the usual backpacker route of Thailand, etc. She decided that she wanted to go somewhere a wee bit more unusual. She wanted to do the south of America, and then she also wanted to travel into New Zealand. So she wanted to spend the bulk of her time in America, but then travel on to New Zealand. Her final stop would be Auckland in New Zealand, where she'd spend about 4 or 5 days before heading home back to Essex. From all of the sources I've seen, it seems like Grace actually went travelling alone, which, I mean, do you? I could never do that just because I watch so many crime channels. Probably would never sleep at night. But in this kind of instance, it was said that they would often stay at youth hostels and backpacker hostels where they meet loads of friends, and she was never really alone. In most of her travelling pictures before this incident occurred, it was shown that she had loads of friends. They went on tours, they went on hikes. It never really seemed that Grace was by herself until she got to New Zealand, when it was time for Grace to celebrate her 22nd birthday. She was due to turn 22 on the 2nd of December, and because she was by herself, she arranged a date because she didn't want to spend it alone, which is totally understandable. Imagine spending your birthday by yourself in like a foreign country, that'd be a bit miserable. So she chooses to go on a Tinder date, but she actually goes on a Tinder date on the 30th of November as well. So this is a different boy. She goes on a date with this guy, goes well, goes back to his hotel room, one thing leads to another, that happens. And then on the 1st of December, she arranges to go on a date with a guy who claims to be an oil manager. He's a 26-year-old New Zealander, and he's currently living in a hotel room because he is an oil manager and his work requires him to go offshore quite a lot, so he has no permanent residence. When she's telling her pal Amina about this, Amina thinks it's a little bit odd, which is something I would probably say to my friends. But she then says that she doesn't really think anything strange. He seems like a stand-up guy, and Amina doesn't really push it because she's been travelling herself and said that she was knackered with jet lag and she didn't really want to argue with her on the eve of her birthday. So Grace goes out with this guy. She leaves her hostel wearing a little black kind of flowy dress and a pair of white trainers. She goes out and she meets this man, Jesse Kempson, at the City Life Hotel, which is where Jesse was staying at the time. They then head off to a burger bar where they don't eat, they just have some drinks and catch up, and she really likes him. Apparently it's going well. She's texting Amina saying everything's great, he's a good guy, nothing to worry about. And then they head on to a Mexican tapas bar as well, where they have more drinks. He's buying all the drinks. Apparently he made such a big show about it, like he was a really nice gentleman, and everyone can remember him quite distinctively because he was making such a show of buying loads of drinks for everyone. Oh, do you not just hate those guys in the bar? Now when you go to a bar and they're like, nah, drinks, you want a drink? It's like, no, I can buy my own drink, leave me alone, sir. So he was one of those assholes. And then as she was texting Amina throughout the night, it seemed like she was getting a wee bit more drunk. She was texting Amina stuff like, I love you, and like, you're my best friend and all that stuff, and I'm so lucky to have met you. Just like soppy stuff that girls text each other when they're a wee bit wasted. And after some more drinks, they then head to the City Life bar, which is across from the hotel. I think it's Sky City Bar, I think. And they're in the bar, they're just chatting, they're sitting in a wee corner booth, it's all private, and he leans in for the kill, and they kiss. They're hugging, he's got his arm around her. Everything seems really, really romantic on CCTV. Sorry, God love this bloody eye and these hairs I've got in my eye. Not today. Oh, sorry. So, in the bar, winching, as we say here in Scotland, means kissing. Such a loser. Don't judge me. And they are having the best time ever. She then goes to the toilet. So Grace gets up, goes to the toilet, and completely unbeknownst to Grace, when she's away at the toilet, and hold on to your seats, guys, because this is horrific. Yeah. When she's away, Jesse then leans over and starts to sip her drink. He picks up her drink and starts drinking her drink. He's got his own drink, but he's sipping her drink. After that, he stops and he acts normal, right? No, he doesn't. He then leans over, gets her bag, puts Grace's bag on the table, and just starts rifling through it. Just starts going through it as if it's his. And poor Grace is in this toilet with no clue, absolutely no clue that he's doing all this weird shit. Grace then comes out the toilet, and God love her, she has no clue any of this has just went on and been caught on CCTV. The two then get more lovey-dovey, and Grace agrees to go back to his hotel room. She agrees to go back to the City Life Hotel with Jesse in room 308 where he's staying, because he's an oil manager, apparently. And then when the two get up to the room, that is the last time that Grace is ever seen on CCTV. She's seen going in at the City Life Hotel, but she's never seen coming back out. Around midnight that night, all of her family and friends started pouring in their birthday messages because it was late back at home, and they all started wishing her well and wishing her a happy 22nd birthday. Unfortunately, little did they know that Grace would be lying dead on the floor of room 308, forever frozen at the age of 21. When Grace's birthday comes and goes and she doesn't message anyone, understandably everyone's really stressed out about this, like anyone would be. She's constantly been keeping them updated with her pictures and everything from her travels. Her family even said that she bombarded them, that was their exact words, so therefore she had been sending them almost too many pictures, and they were kind of like, right, we're over it, we know you're abroad, it's okay. And her family thought this was extremely bizarre that she hadn't messaged any of them back to say thanks for her birthday messages, or this is what I got up to on my birthday. Everyone thought they would give it a wee bit of time. Maybe she's just out enjoying herself, maybe she's not got reception. Need to remember she was staying at these really low rent hostels, so therefore there's barely anything there. I remember I stayed in one in Belgium actually when I was like 14, and it was like something out of like American Horror Story. It was disgusting, like I could still smell it, like to this day I could still smell it, Rose. And literally it just smelled like damp and like urine. It was bogging. And then you would go in, and we got into our room and it had like a wee ensuite, which everyone was like, oh, you've actually got a toilet in your room, that's quite nice. But on the floor of the toilet there was a massive hole like cut out of the tile, and you could actually see the room below us, their bedroom. So we literally had to put like a shoe over it, like a Converse over it, to make sure that no one could, but obviously anybody could just like grab like a pencil and just kick it away. So yeah, that's my little nugget of wisdom. But anyway, Grace's family think maybe she's just enjoying herself. We'll give it a day or two. But then when Grace's brother's birthday, which is on the 4th of December, 2 days after Grace, rolls by, everybody knows something's up because she's not messaged her brother, and Grace would never do that. This is when Grace's family call in the early hours of the 5th of December to report Grace as a missing persons. The New Zealand police then contact her roommate that she's staying with, and she explains that Grace hasn't been home since she went on that date in the night of the 1st. He said that she posted a photograph on Facebook and a boy commented under it, but she wasn't sure if that's the boy she went out on the date with on the 30th or on the 1st, because she had already been on a date with that other boy. So the roommate said she wasn't really sure, but it didn't look too good because all of Grace's items were still in the room, such as like her camera, her passport, everything had been kept in the room when she left to go on that date. New Zealand police then asked all the surrounding businesses to look on their CCTV on the night of the 1st and see if they could see any movement of Grace. So luckily they all do, and she's actually seen on the City Life Hotel's CCTV. So she's seen on that, that, and they know that she was in that hotel at around kind of 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock that night. Her family then come over to Auckland in New Zealand to hold a press conference with the police in order to plead for anyone to come forward with any information about Grace's disappearance. So whilst they're speaking, they actually find out that the police have a person of interest. You see, the guy who'd commented on that picture of Grace that night was the same guy. It was Jesse Kempson, and he'd done it almost to kind of cover his back as if he wasn't with Grace at the time. So he had commented as if Grace had left him, and he was commenting after the date had ended, which wasn't the case. Once the press conference is over, the police actually find more CCTV footage of Grace in the City Life Hotel and the Sky City bar that she was in across the road. She's seen there with a 26-year-old male who they believe is the same man who messaged her on Facebook. When they find out that this is the guy, they call him in for questioning. And when they call the guy in, he first lies to police. He's a wee bit of a weirdo. So he tells police that he's not even living in the hotel, but police then obviously, after they have their meeting with him, follow him back, go into his room in his hotel. So they just ask the reception, we're looking for this guy, this is his name, is he staying at this hotel? And obviously the receptionist just said, yeah, he's staying in room 308. So he's already been caught in a lie, which doesn't look too good for him. He's the last person who saw Grace alive, and not only that, he says that they went on a date, it went really well, and then he and Grace parted ways around 9 p.m, where he actually then went and met another woman who wasn't Grace, but she never turned up. He even says that he was going a certain path because it was safer for him that night, which is just the weirdest thing to say when you've actually butchered someone, but okay. Police then search Jesse's room, room 308 of the City Life Hotel, and they find evidence that there was perhaps a struggle there. There is blood on the side of the bed, on the actual bed, on the floor next to the bed, and then oddly enough, inside the fridge, as if someone had the fridge door open and there was blood spatter that had sprayed across the contents of the fridge, which is just dirty. And then when they further speak to Jesse, explaining all this, explaining that Grace hasn't been seen leaving the hotel, so she definitely stayed here with you, and then they found all this blood, they have the DNA tested from the blood, and it did belong to that of Grace Millane. Jesse, at this point, he's backed into a corner. There's not much he can really say, is there? Like, I mean, we all know it was Jesse. So he then says that apparently he did enjoy the night with Grace. They did have a nice date. She then came back to the apartment to sleep with him. And then during sex, he strangled her as requested by Grace because she was into BDSM. He then strangled her, must have done it a wee bit too hard, because when he left Grace, he then went into the shower. And then he said he went into the shower, left Grace, she was alive at this point, allegedly. And then he was in the shower, fell asleep in the shower, because everyone just does that naturally. And then after he had his shower, he went out to the room, didn't see Grace, she wasn't there. He thought she had gone home, and then he just rolled into bed and fell asleep until the next morning when he found Grace lying on the floor at the side of the bed. So as if he like rolled over and just saw her dead body lying on the floor where he'd left her. Police obviously don't believe this because, you know, who would? And then Jesse explains that he doesn't know what happened to Grace. He said that Grace did have a small nosebleed and that he panicked when he saw her on the ground, so much so that he then decided to take her body and bury it in the Waitakere Ranges, which is a rural area of kind of rainforest in New Zealand. He then said that he buried her body in a shallow grave and that he just went on with his life, but he was terrified and that's why he had made this awful choice. The police think it's a little bit strange. They then go through Jesse's phone records and what they find is astounding. Jesse had been Googling rigor mortis, flesh-eating birds, and vultures. Is there vultures in New Zealand? Hottest fire, which, is that even a thing? Hottest fire? And he was Googling for large suitcases or like large sports equipment suitcases, like kind of wheelie bags and stuff like that. And if that wasn't bad enough, he then started Googling for porn sites and hardcore pornography. So he was literally feet away from her dead body and he started watching porn. Said that he watched porn for like an hour and then he then went back to Googling about birds and stuff like that, and then he then watched some more porn, because apparently that's how you react when there's a dead girl in your apartment. And even at this point, police are not buying what he's selling. They don't believe him. They think he's talking a load of crap just to get himself out of this, because he's been caught red-handed. And when they go through his phone even further, they find pictures of Grace Millane after she's deceased, intimate pictures that he's taken of her as she's lay there on his floor dead. He's taken pictures of her kind of body, naked body, and her genitalia as well, and then Googled pornography. So I'm just not really buying that. Jesse then understandably lawyers up and he pleads not guilty when he's charged of the murder of Grace Millane. He pleads that it was an accidental death during sex and that the sex was consensual and it was BDSM. Now, this is also known as what people call the 50 Shades of Grey plea. The official term is the Rough Sex Act, and it basically means that if someone consents to being harmed during sex and it leads to their demise, they have a part in their death, so they have a responsibility even though they're the victim of the death. So it's one of those ones that guys like to just pull out if they've strangled their wives or their girlfriends, because everyone who knows anything about true crime knows that you cannot strangle someone in under 3 to 5 minutes. You just can't. So stop saying it, guys, because it's not a thing. He has offered a plea deal. I think it's about 17 years he's offered in prison, but he knocks that back and he decides to put Grace's family through the horror of a trial. At this point as well, his lawyer actually requests for him to seek immunity from the media. So what that means is that his name cannot be published in any legal documents and is listed simply as Tinder Ghost. This is because they want him to have the right to a fair trial. This, I don't know. I know we have things like gagging orders and stuff like that here in the UK, but I've never really heard of anyone's name being withheld. I've heard of victims' names being withheld before, like that of Baby P, who was a little baby who was sadly beaten to death here in the UK, and that baby's name wasn't released and the surname of the family wasn't released until whoever did it was convicted. Yeah, but I've never actually heard of name suppression for someone who was accused of rape or murder or anything like that before. So first his name suppression was actually denied at first, and then they appealed that, so therefore he was granted interim name suppression for like 21 days. So when the trial began, no one would have the right to publish his name. But obviously Grace was a UK citizen and the Daily Mail in the UK did not take to these rules at all. They decided they wanted to publish his name and they just said a big. But the guy was named obviously as Jesse Kempson in the newspapers, and a lot of scrutiny came to the Daily Mail about this because he was obviously innocent until proven guilty, and this is a law from New Zealand. But honestly, I mean, I just think it was a way to like protect him and then victimise Grace, because the whole way through the trial, Grace's name was dragged through the mud. So it was like he had this umbrella of protection from the New Zealand courts, but Grace didn't have any of that. So it was fine for her private life to be put all over the national papers, but it wasn't okay for his name to be even put in. As the trial begins, it does seem quite clear where the defence's line of inquiry are going to be going. So they are going to go full on ahead and attack Grace's character. Slut shaming and victim blaming, it's just rife in this case. And sadly, their first port of call is to bring guys up that Grace has slept with in the past onto the stand and explain the kind of rough sex that she liked and that she was quite a loose person. Now this backfires on Jesse's team a wee bit, because the first guy that they bring up is the man who she was on the Tinder date with the night before Jesse, the guy that she had slept with. So this guy had said that yeah, he and Grace had a nice time, they slept together, and she did ask him to choke her during sex. However, he said that she seemed quite experienced in BDSM, and she even had safe words and a tapping out method so that he would stop if it was going too far. The next man that they chose to bring up onto the stand for the defence defence was an ex-boyfriend of Grace's. So she'd been with this guy for a wee while, and it was actually together that they explored BDSM. Grace was quite innocent when she met him, and they had become really comfortable with each other and wanted to try out new things, which go and get it. If you want it, go do that. He said also that Grace and he had safe words and tapping out method, and that Grace would never pass out or anything like that, and they'd been on many date nights where she'd been drunk and then went back and slept together. All the time that this is going on and this is getting spoke about, it's getting splashed in the papers, Grace's mum is sitting there listening to every single word about this, about how guys wanted to choke her little girl. Meanwhile, Jesse's sitting there with the umbrella of protection and nothing's been said about him or his character. It is hard to know kind of what's true and what's not in these terms, because obviously everyone can determine a relationship completely differently, and Grace's friends, our friend Amina, actually said that Grace was quite kind of prudent when it came to sexual partners, and that she wasn't the kind of girl who would just go home with anybody, and that she would be quite selective of who she slept with. So this kind of sleeping with one guy on the 30th and then sleeping with another guy on the 1st, she said it didn't really ring true to her, and that perhaps Jesse got her up to the hotel room under a ruse, maybe for more drink, maybe for just a movie, if he'd seemed like a nice guy. Also, you do feel like you'd be kind of protected in a hotel. There's CCTV everywhere, and maybe she just thought she would be safe, and sadly she wasn't. When Jesse's defence team start talking about Jesse's background, they're trying to get sympathy for Jesse by saying that he comes from a broken home, his family were divorced, and he then went to move in with his gran and grandpa, who had a difference on opinion on the way of life that he was living, and that they didn't want him to be in their house anymore, which I bet you now they know what he was up to. Fair play. So the defence kind of jump on this, but it backfires a little bit because they're acting as if he's got this kind of weird hatred towards his mother the whole time, and everybody else in the courtroom is like, alarm bells are ringing, because we all know what that leads to. So it just doesn't really work in his favour, and it does make the prosecution argue the fact that perhaps this hatred towards his mother led to a natural hatred towards women in general. The prosecution then bring forward witnesses who've previously been on Tinder dates with Jesse, and one said everything was fine, everything went great, they had pizza, they had a nice night, he's a charming guy, whatever. Next, the next girl then said that she had a completely different experience with Jesse. She said they went out on a date, everything was fine, very charming, and then when they got back up to the hotel room, something switched. She had made it quite clear before they went to his hotel room that they weren't having sex, and she wasn't up for that night. But Jesse didn't take no for an answer, and when she said that she didn't want to sleep with him, he then, brace yourselves, proceeded to take his clothes off and shove his junk in her face. And when she was like, no thank you, get that out of my face, he then proceeded to pin her down by her shoulders and her arms. And it might be noted right here that when Grace's autopsy was performed, she had massive bruising on her shoulders and her forearms and on her chest, as if she had been kneeled on. So do with that what you will. This poor girl is then kneeled on by this big guy, because he was a big guy, he was like 6 foot something-ish, and he was a big dude, and he kneels on her until she feels like she's going to pass out. He then proceeds to sit his naked ass on her face and smother her with it. He literally put his bum on her face. So understandably, she cannot breathe. He is smothering her with his bum cheeks. She can't breathe. It's not funny, but you know. And she thinks, I'm going to die. He's trying to kill me. He's trying to smother me. So she then is really clever and plays dead. And when she starts to go limp, or what Jesse thinks is limp, he then gets off her. And then when she wakes up, he gets a shock and he's like, oh, I didn't do that on purpose. But she can tell that he wasn't expecting her to wake back up. She's like, what were you doing, you weirdo? Like, of course you were doing that on purpose. And then he starts having this weird breakdown and starts like sobbing incessantly and starts saying that no one's ever loved him in his life and that she'll never love him and no woman will ever want to be with him. And then later down the line, he actually proceeded to tell this girl that he had cancer. So he's that kind of guy as well. This was quite a damning statement, especially considering the evidence on Grace when she was examined in her autopsy, but the defence absolutely railroad this girl for about 3 hours on the stand, and they proceed to ask her if why she felt so uneasy around this guy and he did this horrible thing to her, why she then proceeded to exchange in hundreds of messages after the incident. But the girl explained that the day that she was meant to meet Jesse for the day that Abe smothered her, he had actually intercepted her on her bus route from her home to where she was meant to meet Jesse. So he had found out where she lived, found out the route she would have taken, and then met her there. So understandably, she felt a little bit creeped out. He'd clearly stalked her, and then she said that he'd mentioned connections to the mob and the fact that he knew gangsters and that he was unhinged, and she knew that already from what he'd done, and then the fact he was claiming that he had cancer when he never. So she was terrified of him, and she just wanted to keep things nice and friendly, and I can understand that. I mean, I can understand how it looks fishy. She's kept messaging him after it, things like that, but they never actually met up again. So that just goes to show she was keeping him at arm's length, but she was keeping things friendly, which you would do if someone had managed to find you on your bus route home. Possibly, I would say the most damning thing that the courts could find on Jesse was the fact that he had Googled all these creepy things once Grace was legally deceased. So she was currently getting messages through on her phone from her family wishing her happy birthday, and he's there Googling hardcore pornography. He's taking photos of her on her phone whilst he can see those messages coming through. So this isn't something that an innocent person would do who just made a mistake. Why didn't he phone an ambulance? There was so much time in between the time of death and when he disposed of Grace's body, which we'll get onto in a minute. This was just not matching up for prosecutors. Jesse had said that he had reacted in shock. He never actually takes the stand himself because obviously he's got the social skills of a banana, and they just explain away that he was acting out of fear and shock, but really that does not explain the naked photos and the pornography. It just doesn't, sorry. Grace's poor mum then had to watch as everyone saw the CCTV of how Grace actually eventually left the hotel. You see, he had hired a rental car to pick up the suitcase that he had put Grace in. He wheels Grace out on a luggage cart down the corridor of the hotel, past people, like actually past hotel guests, into the lift, and then you can see him like bumping it over the lift, just no care for her at all. And then he takes the lift down, he gets into the car park, puts the suitcase in the back of the rental car, parks it in the hotel car park, and then goes to his bed, all the while she's literally decomposing in the back of that car in that suitcase. Also really important here is the fact that he was on a Tinder date with another woman the next day after he killed Grace. So the journalist we spoke about at the beginning of this case, she was actually meant to go out with Jesse on the night that he was meant to see Grace, but she was busy, so they rescheduled. So that just goes to show how lucky she bloody was, because if she'd gone out with him, who knows if that had been her on the floor, if she'd been buried in the suitcase, you just don't know. It's so horrific to think that literally whilst he was out whining and dining this other girl, there was another dead girl lying in his hotel room. Like, what would have happened if the date had gone well and she wanted to come back with him? Would she have been next? Who knows? Later on in the trial, another woman actually came forward to say that Jesse had raped her. Jesse said that he completely denies this. Still to this day, he vehemently denies that ever happened, but he was found guilty. There was apparently messages from Tinder that proved that this was true, so I believe the victim, and I don't think anyone else would really not. Do you know what really annoys me though? They proper hammered in that his childhood life was so traumatic. There was no abuse. There was no sexual abuse. Not that that's like the only form of trauma, but there was like no verbal abuse, no physical abuse, no sexual abuse in his childhood. Literally, they harped on about the fact that he was so upset because his mum and dad got divorced. Well, it's like 50% of the population, mate, and you don't see them out raping people. As the evidence is clearly mounting up, they also find CCTV of him at a car wash. So Jesse takes his car to get washed, totally normal, and then he brings out a shovel at the car wash to get washed, and then he brings out a single shoe to get washed at the car wash. Totally normal, Jesse. Oh, I've got so many words for this guy, but literally there's not enough time in a day. After only 5 hours of deliberation, the jury came to the conclusion that Jesse Kempson was guilty of the first-degree murder of Grace Millane. He was then sentenced to 17 years to life by the judge on this case, and he will be up for parole after 17 years when he's only 44. My heart breaks for Grace's mum at this point because she has to make a victim impact statement, and because it was all the way over in Auckland in New Zealand, Grace's mum had to do it via a video link. And you can just see she's absolutely destroyed. Like, now when someone's so past the part of like emotion, she's not sobbing, she's quite quiet, she looks like a nice dignified woman, and she's just like gone. Like, you can tell when she's talking about her daughter, she's just gone. Like, it's such a shame. And she just says to Jesse that whilst you were harming my daughter, I just wish that I could have traded places with her and that she would have given anything to swap positions with Grace. She said that whilst you were taking her life, I should have been there, but unfortunately I couldn't be, and she was left alone, terrified in a room with you. And I just think that's the worst thing for a wee mum to know, just that her last moments were just probably so scared. Me personally, after reading about his kind of rape convictions and things like that, I don't really think Grace went up there willingly to have sex with him. I just don't. I think perhaps she went up to watch a movie, have a few drinks. She thought she was safe in a hotel with loads of security, and sadly she wasn't. Also, he kind of kids on that he didn't notice that she was dying under his hands, but she actually had hemorrhaging in one of her eyes, so therefore he didn't notice that whilst he was strangling her, one of her eyes was pulling up with blood. It just doesn't make any sense. Jesse's always tried to give this image across that he is really remorseful for what he did to Grace, but he really proved himself to be the arsehole that he is when he decided that he wanted to appeal his conviction, because 17 years apparently isn't short enough. So he then appealed the case and said that too much emphasis was placed on the topic of consent, when it was completely his team that said that she consented to this behaviour and that argued the rough sex defence, and of course that was denied. A lot of her friends post nice things on Facebook about her and nice memories about her, and definitely she made an impact in a lot of people's lives. She was really free-spirited because that's how she'd been raised by her mum and her dad, and you can definitely see that in her memory pages on Instagram and on Facebook as well. This case did bring up quite a lot of anger within feminist groups because of the rough sex defence, and it's not the first time that this has caused absolute outrage. In 2016, a young woman named Natalie Connelly was murdered by her then boyfriend at the time. She was found at the bottom of the stairs in his big mansion, lying in a pool of her own blood. Natalie had probably one of the worst injuries that I've even heard about when Googling these crimes. So Natalie actually had internal injuries that were so far gone that she could have possibly died from those alone. These were actually left from a bottle of carpet cleaner being placed where it shouldn't be placed. I'll just say that. There was also extensive bruising on Natalie, on her breasts, on her buttocks, on her face, on her neck, on her head. She'd been beaten so badly, and not only that, then she had traces of bleach sprayed on her face. So her partner was then questioned at the time, John Broadhurst, and he'd said that she had died as a result of a sex game gone wrong. Yeah, because when me and my boyfriend want to get real kinky, we just grab a wee bottle of Sif and start spraying it in each other's faces. The police actually did ask him why he had sprayed bleach in his girlfriend's face when she was dead, and he said so that he could clean it up for when the ambulance came. You're a monster, but okay. Natalie even had a little girl, and she sadly said in a news article later on that she doesn't like when her friends talk about their mummies because she'll never see hers again. To prosecutors, this seemed like a cut and dry. He was going to get caught for it. That was fine, but no, a grand jury actually refused to convict, and they only charged him of manslaughter. They said that this had been an accidental sex game gone wrong, and they sentenced him to a maximum of 3 years in prison. 3 years. Okay, but people who sell pot get like 5 to 10. Okay. Natalie also had a twin sister, and her twin sister said that she was petrified about John getting out of prison, as he was only actually sentenced to 3 years. This means he could serve anywhere from like 15 months and get out. He actually only served 22 months of his jail sentence for the manslaughter of Natalie, and he is out. now. He's been out since November, I think. So yeah, guys, if any of you are going on Tinder dates with a guy called John Broadhurst, I would suggest just stay at home and lock your cleaning cabinet. For years, domestic abuse charities and activists have tried to get this plea abolished. It's so barbaric and it's honestly the worst thing I've ever heard. And I'm going to go on a wee touch of a rant just now because it just annoys me in a wee way that I don't like. I remember when the kind of consent thing started floating about and people were saying that, you know, you have to get consent. If someone says no at any point during sex, you have to stop. And I actually remember at the time a few guy mates and people I used to hang about with were like, oh, you're going to need to start getting a written letter now if you want to have sex. Or that's just going to be a pure worry to us on a night out. Do you not think that women are worried on a night out? No? You don't think that if we're walking to a quiet bank to take money out on a night out, we're stressed that we're going to get raped? No? You don't think that we're in taxi rank and a creepy guy walks past and grabs our backside, we're not scared because none of our friends are with us because they've all went home? No? You don't think that? Because girls don't go out and nights out and have to constantly worry about their own safety. And this is something that does grind my gears because I think it's just been fed into us just by society that as women, it's our responsibility to get ourselves into the right situations so that we don't get attacked or abused or anything like that. It's always this constant victim blaming. If you're in a domestic abuse, why didn't you leave? If your partner starts beating you, well, you should have walked away. Or if you're attacked, say by someone that didn't know yes from no, then you're suddenly this slut-shamed girl that just apparently shouldn't have gone back to his room. No, we have the right to go back to a room with a guy just for a chat or a few drinks. It doesn't mean that we won't have sex with everybody. I think the world should more focus on, instead of teaching women to keep themselves safe, how's about she just teach her sons that no means no and then we'll all be safe? How's about that? Is that good? Okay. I do hope eventually one day that plea will go bye and hopefully we can finally walk about and feel safe and not worry about these things. But I think as far as that kind of case goes, there was nothing that Grace could have done to keep herself safer. Of course, in every situation like this, there's minor red flags. The fact that he said that he was an oil manager and living in a hotel. And these are things that you can, unfortunately, keep yourself safe by learning these things. So there is a good article in Cosmo about internet dating and online safety, and I think it's quite a good one. I've popped it in the link in the description box below, and there's also one on the Tinder website, but I feel like theirs is just quite it's a bit more generalised, whereas the Cosmo one is strictly for women who are dating online. So it's worth a wee read, and if it keeps one person safe, then it's done its job. I hope you all enjoyed this week's case, and I hope each one of you remember the memory of Grace Millane and that she was an amazing girl, and sadly this just happened to her out of circumstance. And if you did like this week's episode and you'd like to see more from me, please feel free to follow me, not home, on Instagram at Megan True Crime. I also have a TikTok at Megan.truecrime, and then Facebook Megan True Crime, and the app for that is at Killer Weekend. Please hit that subscription button and the notification bell just for good luck. Give this video a thumbs up if you want. I don't know, I'm shy. And remember guys and girls, be safe, lock your doors and don't talk to strangers. See ya bitches.